Hi, everybody. We are here for what appears to be our final segment of Skull and Bones Secret Society with WarHamster Brady. How are you, Brady?
I am good. I need to correct you. It is not going to be our final.
Oh, sorry.
We've got at least 2 more episodes after this.
All right, I misunderstood what you said.
No, what I said, well, see, I was half tempted to go out of our regular chronological order and address Judge Boasberg, jump him forward by 2 decades. But yeah, so that's what I was saying. That's my fault. That's typical miscommunication via text. But we're going to save Boasberg for 2 weeks and have him be the grand finale.
All right. Where are we going today?
Today we're going to get through the 1940s. There's some pretty interesting characters, and a lot of these people tie into current happenings as we're getting close to people that we all know and love that are still alive and with us today. So we'll be dropping that. You know, one of the things that we've noticed with this whole Secret Society series on Skull and Bones is, you know, a lot of these people, obviously, they're in one small club or one big club, and we're not in it. And they all working towards this geopolitical New World Order goal at all times. What you're going to see start happening after World War II is the factions start to split a little bit. Previously, we could see it quite often, you know, with a Hegelian dialectic, they pretend to be on opposite sides of the spectrum. But I think with some of the guys we talked to today, we're going to actually see some division within the ranks of Skull and Bones. And that's one of the things I want to highlight today. But you're going to see the new cast of characters, same plot as we've done week after week. And it's these people with their family connections through Yale and Skull and Bones get placed in amazingly coincidental positions to influence United States foreign policy and domestic policy, all for the benefit of the multinational corporations. And these are the people that have their controls and call the shots on things like Operation Gladio. So
yeah, it does seem to come up often. You see those patterns repeat. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we're in the 1940s, and one of the people who's definitely we've already covered before was George H.W. Bush. So a lot of these people are classmates of the former president and director of the CIA, and there's no coincidence. One guy we're not going to talk about because we already did is Daniel Pomeroy Davison of the very wealthy Davison family. Once again, he was the president of the United States Trust Corporation, which is a big deal, handling corporate trust things. But we've already talked about him a little bit. So I am going to jump right in to a gentleman by the name of Townsend Walker Hoops II, Skull and Bonesman, class of 1944. Is that name familiar to you?
No.
I think you're going to find that it is at the very end.
Okay.
And again, I thought I'd heard the name, but when I started researching him, I said, yeah, we got to talk about him. So one of the other themes you're going to find with a lot of these bonesmen is they served very admirably in World War II, but in some really strategic locations. And this guy's another one of those. So he was born in 1922. So it means he was right in his early 20s for World War II. He's the captain of the Yale football team, graduates from the National War College. And then in World War II, he joins the Marines and becomes a lieutenant, serves in the Pacific and with the 5th Marine Division. And he fought at both Iwo Jima and the initial occupation of Japan. So that's a pretty good resume from from a World War II standpoint.
From a military standpoint, a very good one, actually.
Yeah. So in 1947, he gets named the assistant to the chairman of the House Armed Service Committee. How many of these bonesmen have been on those type of committees? Not the head of the committee, just the person right below it. You've talked about that before.
So that would be like the Warren Commission, where you have Alan Dulles. Not that he's a bonesman, but those are the people that actually do all of the work.
Yeah, and I thought you did a really good job of describing that a couple episodes back. It really makes sense. You've got the gatekeepers, and why are these bonesmen always in those positions? It's just not, it's got to be more than a coincidence.
Agreed.
Yep. Doing one thing real quick. Okay, good. I got it. So what's he do after that? His next position is he becomes the staff aide, once again, the gatekeeper, to 3 successive secretaries of defense: Forrestal, Marshall, and of course, Bonesman Robert Lovett, who we went over in detail.
Okay. And so he's doing this as a civilian person or as a military aide? Is
I
he
think
still in the military?
yeah, I think he's still a military aide.
So, and let me just explain something to everybody, because I've actually been an aide on during a deployment to Iraq, and in the Air Force, the lower ranking generals, you have, well, all general officers have both aides and execs. That's not true. They all have executive officers, and the higher ranking generals have aides and execs. So the aide, the military aide, is literally, like, by definition, a gatekeeper. So, for example, when I was the deployed aide of a Army 2-star, you control all access to him. The calendar, the people's whose phone calls get put through, phone calls that he makes, because in essence, if you were loyal to someone else and you wanted to make sure you were setting him up, you could make things like, oh, I couldn't get through, or yes, I left a message, they're supposed to call you back. You literally control that person. And I want everybody to understand that no one sees them except for through you, because there's so many things and so many ways that you can play that system in order to ensure things are set up certain ways.
Yeah, and he's in Washington, D.C. for the Secretary of Defense. That means he's at the Pentagon. Basically, the entire political class has to go through him to communicate with, and what's going on at that point in time. We've got the Korean War going on and other mischief, Gladio type operations. With NATO's toppling governments all over the world.
And what's the exact dates of this assignment?
Well, he was. Let me see. I should have that. Up to 1954, so like 49 to 54.
Okay, and so that's the toppling of Iran, the throwing out of Mossadegh. That is the entire length of the Korean War, in which they were using Operation Gladio, pushing up, actually going into China, trying to reassert Chiang Kai-shek. So, and all of this with actively, and they're in the process of setting up all of the Gladio units, which is in large part being done through the Marshall Fund over in Europe, through the Rockefeller funding of the weapons. And the whole idea of having the Korean War gives you the ability to skim weapons off the top, to be able to populate these things. So this would have been a critical period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you highlighted that, because, and this guy's really, I mean, I don't think you call him number 2 at the Pentagon, but he's right there. He knows everything that's going on, both overt and covert.
So, yeah, you can't call him a number 2, because obviously there's a deputy. And I just want to make sure, again, understand this. In the SecDef suite, I've been there. My ex was in the SecDef suite for 6 years. You have the secretary over here and the deputy way over here. And the people that surround the secretary can go days without ever even seeing the deputy's staff or the deputy himself, because he has his own responsibilities. So again, this aide is a critical gatekeeper.
Very good. Okay, so he gets done with that in 1954, and you are going to love what he does next for a living in the private sector. He goes to work for a consulting company by the name of Cresap, McCormick, and Paget. I think that's how it's pronounced. He would do this for the next 7 years, from 54 on. Well, Cresap, McCormick, and Paget, is called CMP, was formed in 1946 by these 3 guys, and they were all on the staff of General Forrestal. So these are former Army high-ranking staff members that form a consulting firm. And who do they consult for? Corporations, institutions, and nonprofits. They consulted on corporate strategy, human resources, and operational restructuring. Using their military, what they've learned in World War II in military command, they're applying it to the private sector. Their clients, the big ones were, Ford Motor Company, and that's got some interesting international implications. Guys who helped finance the Nazis. Westinghouse was a big client, but their big one on the international stage is they were the consultants for the World Bank.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, so the apparatus that was birthed after World War II to control all of the, let's just call them third world countries that we're going to go exploit, these guys are the consultants for them, and they represent the capitalists that are going to be doing the exploitation. And they have the guy there that oversaw the setting up of the Gladio structure that is going to enforce. Okay, I'm putting all the dots together, so keep going.
Yeah, I'm glad I just put them on a tee and you just smacked them out of the park. Yeah, it's exactly what these guys are doing. So, figure these worth mention. This consulting firm would be bought by Citicorp, my former employer. Back then, a lot of the major financial institutions were buying up consultancies. I can go into detail about what they were doing, but you can use your imagination of why a major investment bank is owning a consultancy, especially one that has global reach.
So,
obviously,
without compromising you and your past experience, let me just tell you what I would imagine, because Citigroup comes up a lot on the illicit funds, alleged money laundering, movement of funds. And so if you've got a consulting company that is actually kind of a cutout in the, and I'm not making any, this is a purely hypothetical. If you have a consulting company that the CIA is using as a front company, which they did repeatedly, and they are orchestrating the coordination of these Gladio / economic hit jobs using the World Bank, money, the World Bank gets money from different places. The loans are secured from different places. So the fact that Citibank would want to buy someone that is in the business of doing all that coordination would make perfect sense.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. When you're consulting for internationally, basically you go into their building and you get access to all of their records. You know every single thing that's going on behind the scenes. You go back to report it back to Citicorp, and I think they can make some really good investment decisions based on that.
So, are you suggesting that some of the international companies use that capability of having consulting companies doing corporate espionage?
Yeah, 100%.
The whole purpose that the CIA has them for.
100%. Okay, last thing really important about this CMP consulting firm. This one's going to blow you out of the water. They are notable for pioneering the consulting in the entire nonprofit sector. In fact, in 1955, they have wrote a brochure that coined the term nonprofit organization. All these non-government organizations, all these nonprofits we're dealing with today with Doge, all of them got their start from this company, and this bonesman was there at the time.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
So they set up the structure that they're going to use to fund the CIA using. And how close is he to Bush in the class?
Let me double check that real quick. Bush would have been 48, and he was, what did I say, 40?
That's crazy. So they're within a very short span of time to have been more than just casual secret society people generationally separated. So they're very close in time frame, which means they're very close in age. And he is in the CIA during this entire time, this time frame that you're talking about.
Yeah, he's a classmate of James Buckley, William Buckley's older brother, and also 1 year after David Atchison, who we've highlighted.
Yeah, that's
Bush,
right.
Bush would be 4 years later, but they all know each other. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's really the whole point. Is it's this small group of people from this Eastern establishment, blue blood families, all go to the same prep schools. Almost all of them, they go to Yale, go Skull and Bones. A lot of them go through Harvard Law, and they end up with their fingers at all the choke points of our government. That's just, and it's more than a coincidence that Yale's not that good of a school. It's not that hard to get into. Okay, so he leaves there in '64. He gets called back into service as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Affairs. What's going on in 1964? The build up to Vietnam.
So now let me just say this. That office in the Department of Defense, International Affairs, is the belly button for Operation Gladio. It has came up in almost every book of people that coordinate with the CIA. And let me explain why. Because that office has everything to do with the defense attaches that are placed in the same embassies with the CIA. And in the case of Otto Skorzeny, we learned that the military attaches were actually Skorzeny handlers for the CIA. So that office is critical to the infrastructure of Operation Gladio.
Excellent. His next job is the principal deputy for international security affairs at the Pentagon. Pretty much the same, very similar to what you just described. In '67 to '69, he was the Undersecretary of the Air Force at the Pentagon. He was, I guess, firsthand witness of the Tet Offensive, and it really turned him against the war. He started advising against it. He would kind of change his spots a little bit at this point in time. Gets out of government and really focuses on his writing career, becomes the president of the Association of American Publishers. Now, that's interesting to me because at the time, we know that Robert Maxwell still had a near monopoly on American textbook publishing. And we also know that a lot of these bonesmen, they either started or ran major publishing companies as well as major newspapers. Well, this guy's sitting at the head of their agency. So, and of course, we know that through Operation Mockingbird, all of that stuff has been infiltrated by CIA for decades.
So still a gatekeeper, just in a different line of work.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. What's he do next? Okay, there's a famous phone call between Nixon and a guy named Charles Colson, where Colson relayed that LBJ believed that Hoops played a major role, this bonesman, in the release of the Pentagon Papers. And that's where basically the quote is LBJ's admin had systematically lied not only to the public, but also to Congress. That's what the Pentagon Papers were. And Nixon and his aide thought that this guy Hoops was the guy who released it. So like I said, he soured on Vietnam. It appears that that's the case.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. He was a co-chair of a group called Americans for Salt. And of course, the SALT Treaty was, what is the exact name of the SALT Treaty? I had that before. Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, 1972. So he became an anti-war peacenik, it appears. Not completely, but he wrote several books. He's a very, very well-known writer, and this is where I said you may have heard of him. First book, I'll do this in reverse order. He wrote a book called FDR and the Creation of the United Nations, where he talked about the failure of the League of Nations, and then how FDR had this really bold and wonderful dream of fixing that. So he's an FDR fanboy. He also wrote a book called Driven Patriot, The Life and Times of James Forrestal in 1992. But the one you probably have heard of him first for is a book he wrote in '73 called The Devil and John Foster Dulles. And again, it was a bit of a puff piece on the Dulles brothers and all their decision making. It does not get into the tough analytical stuff that we've talked about, but so that was how he finished his career, was writing books.
So that tells me he didn't actually change his colors. He was just one of those people that pretended to do that so that he has more legitimacy in writing those books, when those books are going to be limited hangout.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can see the FDR being a fanboy there, being a fan of the United Nations, transitioning into being a peacenik. I can see that connection. So let's call that a maybe, whether he changed his spots or not. But it's a data point to keep in mind. And we're going to have talk about that a little bit more with some of these other characters. So whether did they change their spots or not? And the answer is maybe. I don't know. So keep your skeptical Gladio glasses on, please.
They're permanently affixed.
That's good. All right, next guy we're going to talk about is a guy by the name of John Chafee, Chafee. He's a bonesman, class of 1947. All right, you want to talk about this next little bit. You want to talk about incestuous. So he's born in 1922 in Providence, Rhode Island. His great-grandfather, Henry Lippitt, was the governor of Rhode Island from 1875 to 77. His great-uncle, Henry Frederick Lippitt, was a Rhode Island governor. His great-uncle, Henry Frederick Lippitt, was a U.S. senator from Rhode Island. So it sounds like this family has a little bit of influence in Rhode Island.
And what's the significance of Rhode Island in money?
I know it's favorable for trusts. I usually go Delaware before Rhode Island, but it's major.
No, but I mean all of the families. You want to speak about the gathering of the Vanderbilts. They're all in Rhode Island, right? It's like the northern part of Jekyll Island. The same crowd that all had houses on Jekyll Island all have houses in Rhode Island, do they not?
Yeah, that's one of like 3 or 4 different Eastern Seaboard enclaves where the average house is $10 million now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And yeah, you'll find that a lot of these Rhode Island senators end up on the Senate Banking Committee.
For a reason.
Yes.
Because the bankers all have houses in Rhode Island and they control who gets to Washington, D.C. through Rhode Island.
Okay. He's also got an uncle, Zechariah Chafee, who was a Harvard law professor. That matters because of all the Yaleys that went through all the Skull and Bones when it became Harvard Law. So John Chafee, once again, another one of these war heroes. He joins the Marine Corps for World War II. He actually spent his 20th birthday fighting on Guadalcanal. And he also fought in Okinawa in 1945. So pretty good military background. Comes back to Yale, as a lot of these guys did. And of course, he goes to law school. Guess where? Harvard.
Of course.
And it's almost, I mean, what is it, like 2/3 of these guys went to Harvard Law?
I think we're probably closer to 75%, but yeah.
The formula is easy. Prep school, Yale, Skull and Bones, Harvard Law, government, ruin the world. That's the whole, that's the routine time after time. So in 1951, he gets recalled to the Marines as a rifle company commander for the Korean War. And there's an author named James Brady who, I guess, covered him. And his quote in his book, talking about Chafee, said he was the only truly great man I've yet met in my life. So apparently he was an amazing rifle company commander. Really good reputation. Comes back to Rhode Island in 1956 and, of course, goes into politics because that's what Chafees do. He's in the Rhode Island House of Reps till 1962. And then in 1962, he becomes elected governor of Rhode Island as a Republican. That's interesting. The Republican part keeps that, but because Rhode Island isn't necessarily a red state, he would get defeated in 1968. But if by my count, that's the 5th person in this one family that's been governor of Rhode Island. Little incestuous.
Yeah, and 68 was obviously a pivotal year for the Democrats with the assassination just of JFK happening just before that, and RFK in 68. Politically, that was a pivotal year.
Yep. So now he's out of office. He needs a job. And of course, Nixon picks him to be what? Secretary of the Navy. 1969. What's the Navy doing that year? Vietnam.
They're taking people to Vietnam and bringing back drugs.
Mm-hmm. Under his watch. Tries to run for the Senate in 1972 and does not get elected. He does get elected in 1976, which would make him the first Rhode Island Republican since 1930. One of his committees I found interesting was he joined the Senate Committee, and we've seen this before, on Environment and Public Works. That's the same committee James Buckley sat on at the same time. James Buckley, the bonesman from last week.
That's interesting.
And the environment part. We've talked about, what's going on in the 70s with the environmental movement, all done through the United Nations via Rockefeller lackeys.
Where they start the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Chafee's a big environmentalist. That's his big political thing. He sponsors the following: the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Super Fund to clean up hazardous waste. And these are all, when they say Super Fund, these are all slush funds for nonprofit type organizations.
Correct. Especially the super slush fund for cleaning up hazardous waste, because who makes the hazardous waste? The international syndicate that owns all of these industrial things that are the oligarchs. And so this is just this is something that is a reoccurring theme, pattern, if you will, is everything that they do, they end up pawning off the expense of doing it onto us. We went back and you brilliantly made the analogy of the East and West Indies having their own armies and their own intelligence. And all World War I and II did was prime the pump for putting that inside of the government and making us pay for it. For the first time ever after World War II, we have a standing army. For the first time after World War II, we have a standing, quote unquote, central intelligence that doesn't work for us, that works for them. So all they did was offshore their expenses onto the American taxpayers. And conveniently, these are the same people behind the IRS and the change in taxation to tax the individual. So all they did was collude to move their corporate expenses onto us as slaves.
And I'll take it even a step further than that. The way our country works, it's a cartel system. And a monopoly is a single entity dominating an industry. Cartel are multiple entities scheming together to basically, most importantly, maximize their profits, more importantly, to eliminate competition. That's why cartels exist. And one of the ways they eliminate competition is they get the government to overregulate an industry. The established companies have got the money power, the lawyers. They wrote the darn bills with their lobbyists. And it basically keeps the barriers to entry from any competition coming into so many industries around America. You create vast bureaucracies, NGOs, nonprofits, and that's basically how the entire slush fund gravy train works.
And using environmental rules to do it, because the only people that can comply with them is it just increases the cost of entry into the competitive environment. So as they lower the capability of people to enter that market, they basically end up with, as you say, a cartel. And is that not the very definition of fascism as well, where you have these cartels that basically run a figurehead strongman, like in Mussolini's case, that is the thug that keeps the slaves on the machine?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's mercantilism. It's the way it's always been. The companies that are closest to the seat of government always want the government to be bigger and more intrusive. And it's not because, they don't mind paying the taxes as long as it keeps the competition away. So it's competition through regulation. This is why lobbyists in Washington, D.C. are so highly paid. They're the ones that write the bills that do this. And if you notice the biggest environmental politicians, and you go look at who their donations are, it's the same corporations and lobby firms that basically are, asking them to regulate their own industries. So it's a big deal that that's what this guy's doing. Chafee would then sit on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. SSCI has always been the heart of the deep state in D.C. They also sat, of course, because he's from Rhode Island, he sat on the Senate Finance Committee. Interestingly enough, a couple of side notes. He voted against the Clinton impeachment. A little bit of a break from, you'd think, conservatives. You've heard of the USS Chaffee. I think it's a destroyer. It's named after him. And he would get a Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously. And apparently that's deserved if his military service is as grand as it appears to be. Of course, he has a son by the name of Lincoln Chafee. Oh, he was a governor of Rhode Island. And he's a former...
I'm shocked.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And he's a former U.S. Senator from Rhode Island. He went to Brown University. Fun little sideline in Lincoln Chafee's story. He then went to a non-graduate school called Montana State University Farrier School. You know what you learn to do at a farrier school?
Yeah.
You shoe horses.
Right.
This guy spent 7 years shoeing horses, traveling around. Okay.
Where was he traveling around to?
I think he was up. Well, he said he went to Montana State. I don't have any detail. I know he did have one horse that won a derby that he was working with. So I think he was working with racehorses. Becomes a U.S. Senator in 1999. He's appointed to his father's seat when his father passed away, and then he won his own re-election in 2000. He was also the only Republican to vote against the use of force in Iraq. That's Lincoln Chafee. He becomes the Rhode Island governor, as I said, in 2011, and he was a Republican up until 2007, where he would endorse Obama in 2008 and became the co-chair of Obama's 2012 election. So he switches to become a Democrat. Lincoln Chafee sought the nomination for the 2016 Democratic presidential nomination. Didn't get it, obviously, he dropped out. So he's been a Republican. He's a Democrat. Oh, then he becomes a Libertarian in 2019, allegedly. He actually ran for president of the Libertarian Party in 2020. Now, I've got a good friend, Adam Kokesh, who also ran for president of the Libertarian Party in 2020. So I texted him this week and asked him about Mr. Chafee. And let's see if I can find what he said real quick. Give me 1 second. This is worth it. Adam's a great guy. He's a big libertarian activist, and he's a lot of fun to talk to. He's one of those people that believes the Articles of Incorporation should have remained and the Constitution is illegal. But he backs up his debates really well. He also said he's going to call Chafee and have him watch our show. Adam really liked our show last week. So what did he say about him? I've got a little experience from when we were both running for the LP nomination. He seemed like a great guy, very capable and genuine, if slightly naive, and limited in political success by his own ethics. And that's from a good friend of mine who I trust. So that's Mr. Chafee. Fun story, huh? All right. Next cast of characters we have, of course, is a guy by the name of Charles Sheldon Whitehouse. Bonesman, class of 1947.
I've heard that guy.
Uh-huh. You also have heard of his son, who we'll get to. So Charles Sheldon is born in 1921 in Paris, France. His great-grandfather, this will shock you, was a railroad exec. Yeah, that's where the White House money comes from. Central Pacific Railroad and Southern Pacific Railroad, and one of them is famous for the silver spike that helped close the Intercontinental Railroad. So that's the White House family money.
And so he was in Europe in the 20s, which means he would have been involved in the broadening east of the railroad system. That's a very interesting time to be over there.
His father, Charles Sheldon, the Bonesman, his father is a guy by the name of Sheldon Whitehouse, who was also born in New York City, family money. Interestingly, his great uncle was the guy named William B. Ogden, who was the first mayor of Chicago. And they are related to the 9th through the 12th Earls of Coventry, British royalty. And they got family ties to Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. So you want to talk about a connected family? That would be the Whitehouses. His father, Sheldon, the reason Charles was born in Paris is his father was in the diplomatic service. He was a secretary to Whitelaw Reid. And Whitelaw Reid was the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom in 1908, leading up into World War I. So that's what Sheldon Whitehouse was doing in the 1910s. 1909.
How critical would it be to have to be the ambassador leading up to what we know was basically a planned war?
Yeah. I mean, you know everything that's going on. You're meeting with the, with the British aides, etc. And this guy, once again, is a gatekeeper. Gets promoted in 1909, becomes the secretary to the American legation in a place called Caracas, Venezuela. Let that hang there for a second.
When Standard Oil is doing all of their thing and they need all the railroads built in order to get the... Okay, got it.
So diplomatically, Sheldon Whitehouse would then serve in Madrid, Athens, Stockholm, St. Petersburg. I mean, in fact, he bought the touring car from Alexander Kerensky when he was overthrown as the head of the Russian provisional government by the Bolsheviks. Whitehouse just, let me buy that car. And he does. Which
again, one of the reasons that New York funded the Bolshevik Revolution is so that they could monopolize the expansion into the Russian territory. Railroad-wise, GE got the concession to electrify the Bolshevik country. So basically, the industrialists built the very thing that they lived in fear of, according to them.
Yeah, very much so. Finishing up Sheldon's career, he's at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 with our good friends, the Dulles brothers. In the 1920s, he was the charge d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Paris for the 1920s. He finishes his up career in 1929. He's the U.S. Minister to Guatemala. Yeah, I'll let that hang there. And in 33, he's the U.S. Minister to Colombia. And of course, the Colonel has talked about what's going on in those countries back then ad nauseum.
Yeah, because what's interesting, Guatemala, obviously, and Colombia, again, the oligarchs, the United Fruit, and all of those, the Rockefellers, are building very limited railroad systems through those countries, but they go in each and every time into those countries swearing that they're going to build extensive railroad systems in order to get these concessions for the farmland that they created their banana plantations on, when in fact they only ever created the railroad to and from the port to where they're doing work and screwed the rest of the people. That's
Banana Republic, and these bonesmen are there almost every single time. And of course, he knows everybody, all the important players, from the ones you just named. Okay, so that's it for his career, but very well connected. Obviously, his son is going to be very well connected. And his son is the bonesman of 1947, going back to Charles Sheldon Whitehouse. So what does he do in World War II? Once again, he's a Marine dive bomber pilot, which is pretty darn impressive. 7 distinguished flying crosses and 21 air medals. So pretty legit.
Very impressive.
Yes. That's one thing about these bonesmen is apparently a lot of them serve their country with distinction. Okay, so Whitehouse would then re-enter Yale, where he became a classmate of one William F. Buckley, and 1 year away from George H.W. Bush. Gets done at Yale in 1947. What does he do? He joins the CIA. And where does he go? The Congo. Now, he predated the Lumumba coup in 1960, but he was there for a while. He would also serve, and check this out, Turkey, Belgium, Cambodia. And in Cambodia, he was, I guess he was an actual intel guy because he was tracking the Vietnam and the Khmer Rouge supply lines.
Right.
So, this guy's a legitimate spook.
But understanding that even as far back in the Congo as that was, where did all of the uranium come from to supply the research material for the Manhattan Project? 100% of it came from the Congo.
I did not know that. That's good factoid. All right, so White House gets bored of the CIA and he moves to the State Department. A pretty lateral move, wouldn't you say? And what does he do in the State Department in 1956? His first post? Well, he becomes the State Department's Congo desk officer in 1959. What happens in 1960 in the Congo?
Bitch, are you kidding me?
Nah.
So he's the orchestrator behind the scenes of arranging the murder of Lumumba.
He's certainly involved. He's running state. So where does he go next? Oh, I don't know. How about Vietnam? Yeah, he's the deputy for civil operations and the deputy ambassador in 1972. From there, he goes to Laos.
I came across him when we did the Phoenix program and the whole. He's bad news. Bad news.
Yeah, and for the umpteenth time, I know most of your listeners know this inside and out, but State Department and CIA are synonymous. One's behind the scenes and the other one's up front, and they're working together hand in hand. And there's White House, where CIA Central in Vietnam. And of course, he doesn't stop there. He then goes to Laos in 1973. He's the guy who defunded Hmong, and they got overrun. And a lot of them live here now. Laos would fall to the communist forces like 8 months after he left. So he is leaving a trail of tears behind him. Becomes the ambassador to Thailand in 1975. There's a big deal going on there, of course, with the recapture of the USS Mayaguez. It was a ship that had been apparently taken. We finally got that back, and then the Thais wanted the U.S. out of there, so he oversaw the closing of the last U.S. base in Thailand in 1976. And then he kind of faded off in the sunset with a typical diplomatic retirement, sitting on a couple of unimportant boards. But I think he'd done his job pretty well, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, because I would remind everybody that Thailand is where we sunk $35 million in establishing their national police force and then bribing them to have free access, both air and sea, in order to traffic all of the drugs out of there and the weapons into there.
Yeah, and there's no corruption in Thailand to this day, is there?
We just had a very close family friend move over there, and I told him the one place that you could not live, and that's the exact place that he was going, because it was where like the most famous money laundering for drug money branch of the BCCI or the Nugent Hand Bank was, and that's the very city that he moved to.
Okay, so let's talk about his son, Sheldon Whitehouse, because he's with us today. Sheldon was born in 1955 in New York City with a big old silver spoon in his mouth. Went to Yale, was not a bonesman. Okay. He went to University of Virginia Law School, where Mr. Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Whitehouse, became really good friends with a guy by the name of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So they've been lifelong friends. Sheldon Whitehouse would work as an assistant U.S. attorney from, once again, Rhode Island from 1985 to 90. This whole show ought to be called the Rhode Island episode. He became the executive counsel for the Rhode Island governor, one who was not related to the Chafees, amazingly enough. Got the name of Bruce Sunderland. That's 1991. In 94, Bill Clinton appoints him to be the U.S. attorney for Rhode Island. And interestingly enough, he's the first guy to convict a mobster under the three strikes law. A guy by the name of Gerald Ouimet was sentenced to life. So that was Mr. Sheldon Whitehouse. Becomes the Attorney General in 1998 of Rhode Island, and was best known for a big lawsuit against Sherman Williams for the lead paint. And he actually got that overturned. So his big victory turned into a defeat. Sheldon Whitehouse runs for the governorship of Rhode Island in 2002. I think we ought to look at Rhode Island a little more closely. But he loses that nomination. But he does get elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006. Who did he defeat? Remember that guy, Lincoln Chafee, we just talked about? That's who Sheldon Whitehouse beat to become the U.S. Senator. So Bonesman's son beat a Bonesman's son.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. It's a very small state.
Don't worry about it. There's no collusion here. It's not a small world or anything.
All along says we don't forget the Thai CIA sex tourism. Yeah, I haven't dove too deeply into that, but it most certainly exists. So what's Sheldon Whitehouse do as a senator? Well, he's got this anti-Iraq war platform. Want to quote a peacenik. What else he's done? He's tried to end the filibuster. He's proposed term limits for the Supreme Court. He's proposed a national right to abortion bill. In 2007, the National Journal ranked Sheldon Whitehouse the second most liberal senator. He's got a Liberty score of 2%, which is an F-. He's one of the most left-leaning senators we've had and still have. This is a son of a bonesman. You should be worried because he's been considered a Democrat Supreme Court pick several times. So if they got he might have been up for the next Supreme Court vacancy if Biden had a chance, and that would be a frightening thing. What else do we know about Sheldon Whitehouse? Oh, let's see. He's for D.C. statehood, which would be a travesty. We got busted for an insider trading scandal in 2008. He sat on the Senate Banking Committee and dumped a bunch of stocks right before everything became public. Somehow got off scot-free on that. Sponsored the SAFE Act. Denied ClimateGate even existed. Those are the emails of all the climate research at the CRU at the University of East Anglia in 2009, which basically showed the entire climate hoax for what it was, which is a giant Hegelian plot. Manufacture the crisis.
Don't believe your eyes.
Yeah, and I read those emails, so they were real. They said what they said. I spent when that ClimateGate bombshell dropped in 2009. It really took my understanding of world events to a new level because I read all those and I realized just what a giant scam this climate thing was, and it was all for the purpose of moving towards this one world government. It's getting warmer. What's the solution? Communism. It's getting warm. It's getting colder. Oh, basically we need more totalitarianism. It's always been about bigger government controls. So that was a big moment for me. When they dropped, I didn't sleep the entire weekend. I went through all those thousands of emails and just took furious notes. And I've been on the climate alarmism anti-bandwagon ever since. Okay, so of course, Sheldon Whitehouse is a member of the all-white Bailey's Beach Club. This big fighter for
another shocker, but we're for the poor people.
Okay, I know we're not going to go long today. I got one last guy I'd like to cover today, and he's a fun one.
Yep, absolutely. Let's go.
This guy will come up in a later episode that we do. And wait a minute. Yeah, okay. I'll be able to show that. Guy's name is William Sloane Coffin. Now, we've run into the Sloane family a number of times. And once again, a blue blood Eastern establishment, very old family. William Sloane Coffin, Bonesman class of 1949, is born in 1924 into a wealthy New York City family. I wouldn't know this, but some people might. There was a luxury furniture company called W&J Sloane. And they catered to families like the Rockefellers, the Whitneys, and the Vanderbilts. So we're talking deep establishment family William Sloane Coffin comes from. That family company is the first company to import Oriental rugs. So that's where they were known for. So William Sloane Coffin studies music at Yale. And he was fixated on stopping fascism. That was his thing. So he's in college. World War II breaks out, and he applies to work as a spy with the OSS. But gets turned down for, and this is a direct quote from a book, not having sufficient Gallic features. So the OSS turns this guy down, and I think it's worth taking a look at him. His non-Gallic features. Oops. Try this one more time. This is Mr. Sloan Coffin. Doesn't look like much of a spy. But the OSS doesn't want him. So what does he do? He enlisted in the army and became an officer relatively quickly. And he gets assigned, you're going to love this, he's the liaison to the French and Russian armies in military intelligence. Skull and bones, 23, 24 years old, and he is liaison for military intelligence to the French and Russian armies. Really fun fact. He was trained at Camp Ritchie.
Oh, so he's a Ritchie boy.
It is.
All
we got a
right.
Ritchie.
So we have to tell everybody really quickly what the Ritchie Boy program was. Generally speaking, the majority of them were Jewish because they were families that had migrated to the United States from Germany so that they spoke German so they could be intelligence assets against the Axis German military. And so they had a specialized school called that developed these intelligence assets as part of a sub OSS force to be utilized specifically for linguistic. They ended up being the interpreters at Nuremberg, which means they basically controlled the entire process because they're the ones saying the words that the people are saying. And no, the majority of the Americans there didn't speak German, so they could literally put words in the prisoner's mouth, good or bad, right? And as a result of that, they had enormous control. So the Ritchie Boy program is huge, and you guys have seen me and Mr. J.D. Cartwright, who wrote the book. I mean, it's literally this thick Bible on the Ritchie Boy program that has profiles on all of these people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought you might like that. Okay, so he gets done with Camp Ritchie. Where was it? Okay. It goes back to Yale after the war and becomes good friends with a gentleman we may have heard of named George H.W. Bush. They had both attended the Phillips Academy in high school. So Mr. Sloan Coffin is a very well-connected gentleman. He's actually, I mentioned he was studying music. Well, he has a very famous baritone, or a very good one, I guess. And he was actually president of the Yale Glee Club. That was a big part of his bio, is all of his singing stuff. I'm not going to go into detail there. Gets out of Yale, and what's he do? Well, he joins the CIA as a case officer in 1950. And that was easy for him because his brother-in-law is a guy we've run across by the name of Franklin Lindsay, who is the head of the Offices of Policy Coordination, which is basically the political warfare arm of the CIA. That's his brother-in-law.
And the policy coordination is Frank Wisner's thing that they took basically out of the State Department, meaning they're one, and plugged it into the CIA once it was created. And they do all of the clandestine, all of the Operation Gladio, everything out of that office.
Yep, and that's his brother-in-law who got him the job. He had an interesting assignment with the CIA. Spent 3 years in West Germany recruiting anti-Soviet Russian refugees.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is heat of the Cold War Central.
So let me just put the irony to this. The Ritchie Boy program was taking the refugees from Germany that came to America for their linguistic purposes, and the Ritchie Boy turns around and does the exact same thing for our new designated enemy, Russia, via the Soviet Union. And he's doing that exact same program that he graduated from at Fort Ritchie.
And who is in charge of West Germany's intelligence?
The Nazi Reinhard Gehlen.
And who recruited Reinhard Gehlen to work for the West?
Alan Dulles. And both of those gave birth to Operation Gladio.
Thank you. Well, this guy's there. working for the CIA. So something happens in 1953. He gets disillusioned. And I think this is an actual break because we'll see. He saw what happened with Mossadegh in 1953 and Arbenz in Guatemala in 54, and he kind of got out of the CIA. And there's a famous interview he did with a guy by the name of Charles Pete Rose, where Sloan Coffin, basically William Buckley says Sloan Coffin's the guy who blew his cover with the CIA. He basically let the cat out of the bag in an interview. So the reason we know Buckley's CIA is because of Sloan Coffin. So that's why I suggest he may have had an actual break with the order.
That's probably one of the only semi-legitimate ones that we've come across yet. So I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that you're correct on that one.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see, because he becomes a peacenik. That keeps coming up, and how authentic was he is the question. That's always the question. Are they playing both sides? I don't know the answer. So your skepticism should have been.
Yes, that's exactly right. Why I am always cautious, because once a CIA officer, you always are a CIA officer. You just assume different roles. That's kind of been my pattern recognition as it relates to that. But
so he leaves the CIA and he enrolls in the Yale Divinity School, and basically becomes a preacher and a activist. He got a little bit of reputation for that, and is pegged by Sergeant Shriver in 1961 to run the first training program for the Peace Corps.
Yeah, that one doesn't bode well for me.
Because the Peace Corps, as we know, has been used as many other things. Many other things like the Red Cross have been used for intel purposes.
But wouldn't you have to become a peacenik to be in charge or do something with the Peace Corps?
Yeah. So the question remains: was he planted? Did he change his stripes, or did he actually have a change of heart?
Did he have a change of heart, or did he just assume another role?
Exactly. Just same question phrased differently. And I don't know the answer. So that's the lingering question here, because I cannot slam it home. Skip around. He is involved in the draft. Oh, here's a big one. They were encouraging people to resist the draft. And let's see, I've got a paragraph here. So in January 1968, Coffin, Benjamin Spock, a guy by the name of Marcus Raskin, and Mitchell Goodman, they were all signers of something called a Call to Resist Illegitimate Authority, part of an anti-war collective called Resist. They were all indicted by a federal grand jury for conspiracy to counsel, aid, and abet draft resistance. Of those people, those four, all were convicted, other than a guy by the name of Marcus Raskin. And there's a reason you should know the name Marcus Raskin.
That's Jamie's daddy.
Oh, yes, it is. This guy. Okay, so now we have Bonesman connections to the worst senators going today. Sheldon Whitehouse and Jamie Raskin. Or Raskin's in a house, isn't he? But yes, and that guy somehow, Raskin, his father, skipped the convention.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah. Let's see. Did they? Okay, they got the verdict got overturned on appeals, and he remained the chaplain of Yale University till 1975. Works for the Riverside Church. Gave sermons like abortion, AIDS, homosexuality in Iran. He was controversial. He called it a sin to build a nuclear weapon. And he did a sermon called Pray for the Iranians Too. He's a vocal supporter of gay rights. That's where his son got all this stuff. And that's basically the rest of his life was, I guess, giving sermons around the country. But
breaking down society.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, that's the American Communist Party, somebody he would have known very well, which of course was infiltrated a long time ago. But um, definitely an interesting resume for a bonesman.
But what I have also known that they use people um, in the liberal arts area, because if you are a musician or an actress or whatever, and I know most people know this, but I do think it's worth saying that you have entree into a completely different and very high end group of people. And so if your background is music, and you do world tours, or you're an aficionado where you can go and be critics of different things, or do fundraisers for music events and stuff like that, because you're viewed as an expert, it gives you entree into the upper political class and royalty under fundraising and all kinds of other different things, which is critical for spying.
Yeah, today's stars were not household names for the most part, although a couple we brought it into modern day political circles. But the patterns are really, really interesting. You got the Yale to World War II hero to being placed in all these different positions, intelligence, NGO, otherwise. Just a lot of Forrest Gumps showing up in just the strangest places, all the hot spots, and they all come from one fraternity. Similar backgrounds, Eastern establishment families, railroad backgrounds. How many times does this have to happen until we start to notice a pattern? I don't know if you saw on X, somebody tweeted something about, there's 80,000 pages, whatever, dropping, stuff like that. Well, they talked about, I don't know, I tagged you to comment on somebody, basically making it seem like this is all innocent and not a coincidence. And so there's a lot of apologists out there on X for the CIA. And I think we've demonstrated a pattern that says there might be a little bit more to it than the headlines suggest.
There's definitely a lot of apologists out there for them.
Yeah. And, a lot of that's, I'm not necessarily saying everybody's a plant or a shill or anything like that. I think a lot of people just haven't asked the tough questions. They believe they've been taught through our education system. The Horace Mann broad education system came over from Prussia to not question authority or the establishment. And some of these people live in DC, they live inside this information bubble, and they may even go into DC meaning well, but when you have totally distorted facts that never question the official narrative, you're going to draw the wrong conclusions. So I think that's where a lot of these apologists come from. They just refuse to believe that the good old USA could have been involved in shenanigans.
Well, I have to say that I was in that boat at one point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When does everybody's bubble burst? Well, not everybody gets there, but the more they have personally invested in our belief system, they resist the truth. It's the cognitive dissonance, and I think it takes a lot of intellectual honesty and integrity to get through that, and not everybody does. Well, that's all I have for this week. We got through the 1940s. We have some fun people in the 50s coming up. We're going to get a little wonky on international trade coming up soon, but it's going to be the same pattern of gatekeepers in the bottleneck positions get placed in these new entities, and that'll be the ongoing theme.
Well, that'll be interesting because obviously trade's a big deal right now. So give everybody something to look forward to for next week.
Yeah, so, we've got to. Yeah, again, there won't be a ton of household names next week, but the jobs they did will ring a bell.
Cool. That's what we're trying to do, is educate people that are behind the scenes, names that you have not heard, that have big roles behind the scenes. Do you have anything else coming up that you want to share with anybody, Brady?
Well, yeah, I think we're invited on to a show together tonight.
We are, and we will be there together.
Yep, it is called the Daily 302, and you can find that on Rumble. And Mr. Daniel McGurr has been kind enough to ask the Colonel and I to come on and talk about the same topics. I think he wants. I don't know how far he's gone into Gladio on his show already, but he definitely was intrigued by this content.
Well, I've been there. I've been on a show a couple of times.
I was on once, but it was on more current events, so I didn't
Yeah.
get into the stuff. So this one's kind of. I think I'm invited because of you, so I appreciate
Yes.
that.
Yeah. So definitely it'll be fun.
Well, all right then, everybody. Hope to see you on that tonight, and cheers.
All right. And tune in at 4:00 because we'll be doing our normal show, and I'll be back home. Thanks everybody for joining us.